Every journey has a moment when routine shatters and the ordinary turns into something unforgettable. What seemed like just another departure became a chain of events that exposed hidden prejudice, challenged authority, and pulled an entire industry into the spotlight. A single passenger's calm resistance set the stage for a revelation no one on board could have imagined, and the truth waiting at the end of that flight struck harder than any turbulence. Stay until the end, share your thoughts in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe so you don't miss the story that shows how one flight changed everything. In Seat 2, sat Dorian Vance, a tall black man in a tailored suit whose calm posture stood out against the restless fidgeting of the other passengers boarding around him. And though he seemed to blend into the polished comfort of first class, the eyes fixed upon him told a different story, one he had lived far too many times before. The hum of conversation faded as flight attendant Marybeth Sloan, a young white woman with an expression trained to look professional yet unable to hide her sharp suspicion, stopped in front of him and asked to see his boarding pass again, though he had already shown it at the gate and had settled into his seat with every right to be there. Dorian, careful in his movements, pulled the pass from his pocket and handed it over, meeting her gaze with an expression so steady it unnerved her. She glanced at it quickly, then frowned as if the proof in her hand could not possibly be correct, and asked for his ID too, her voice now louder than before, drawing the attention of the businessman in 1C and the teenager in 4A who lifted her phone to record. The cabin grew quieter, every ear tuned to the rising tension, every eye shifting toward the black man in the expensive suit being interrogated, as though he were trespassing. Dorian kept his voice calm as he explained that he had already provided ID at both the security checkpoint and the boarding gate, yet Marybeth pressed again, her cheeks flushing, her words edged with impatience. "Sir, people pay a lot for first class. You'll understand if we need to verify." The implication was sharp and unmistakable, and though she didn't say it directly, her meaning carried through the cabin like a chill. Men like Dorian didn't belong in seats like these. Dorian leaned back, folding his hands, and for a moment said nothing. The silence that followed rippled across the rows, unsettling her more than if he had argued, because silence in such moments held power. Around him, passengers shifted, some whispering, others blatantly filming, knowing instinctively that they were watching a confrontation about to unfold. Dorian checked his watch, a gleaming Patek Philippe that caught the light above, and noted the time. 12 minutes since he had first sat down, 12 minutes in which nothing but his presence had provoked suspicion. He thought of how many times this story had repeated in his life, how often his skin had spoken louder than his credentials, louder than his wealth, louder than his dignity. Still, he remained steady. Marybeth, unsettled by his composure, whispered to another attendant who looked equally uncertain, then squared her shoulders as if to assert control again. "Sir, if you do not comply, you are holding up this entire flight," she declared, her voice firm yet betraying a crack of unease. Her words spread beyond the first-class cabin, passengers in economy now craning their necks to see what the delay was. Dorian said nothing. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, a message lighting the screen. "Legal team, everything ready, sir. Just give us the word." He read it with a flick of his eyes, slipped the phone back, and remained still. Marybeth's breath quickened, her composure unraveling as she raised her voice again. "Captain Collins will be here in a moment. He'll decide how to handle this." The businessman in 1C sighed impatiently, muttering that he had connections to make, while the woman in 3D whispered, "This is insane," to her husband, who shook his head but did not look away. The cabin had become a theater, and Dorian, though silent, was its center stage. Marybeth's words, laced with bias, had already placed him in a narrative he hadn't written but knew too well. The story of the intruder, the fraud, the man out of place. He allowed the seconds to pass, knowing every pause, every silence, every watchful phone recording would matter later. His calmness was not weakness but strategy, because Dorian understood the power of patience when the storm was inevitable. His smile, faint and controlled, only deepened Marybeth's unease. It was not the smile of arrogance, but of certainty, the kind that said he knew how this would end, the kind that made her shift on her feet and tighten her grip on the boarding pass. Whispers swelled into low murmurs across the cabin, and the teenager in 4A whispered into her live stream, "He's not moving. This is about to blow up." The passengers, already stirred by Mary Beth's insistence that Dorian did not belong, hushed to hear what the captain would say, and the silence was pierced only by the low hum of a phone buzzing, the quiet shuffle of passengers leaning closer, the unmistakable click of a live stream going live. Captain Pierce's voice carried the weight of habit. "What seems to be the problem here?" Mary Beth gestured toward Dorian, her hand trembling, but her tone sharpened by frustration. "This passenger has been in first class for nearly 20 minutes, Captain. He won't provide additional identification, and he's causing discomfort for others." Pierce turned his gaze to Dorian, measuring him as he had measured countless passengers before, trained to spot agitation or danger. Yet what he saw unsettled him. There was no raised voice, no erratic gesture, no disruption. Only a black man in a tailored suit, sitting quietly. Still, Pierce knew Mary Beth well, trusted her judgment in dozens of flights before, and the doubt in her tone struck him harder than the quiet composure in Dorian's eyes. Dorian slowly lifted his boarding pass once more, the paper crisp legitimate, printed with his name, his flight number, his seat assignment. 2A. He held it without a word, letting Pierce examine it carefully. The captain turned it over in his hand, scanning for anything amiss, yet found nothing. Everything in order. "This appears to be valid," he said, his voice slower now, uncertain. Yet Mary Beth interjected quickly, her whisper audible across the cabin. "It's fake. Captain, look at him. Really look. Does he belong here?" Her words, unfiltered and heavy with implication, cut through the air, and gasps rippled across the rows. A businessman in one seat tapped his watch impatiently, but looked up with a frown, while a teenage girl in 4A angled her phone higher, her live stream comments exploding with outrage. One whispered, "Did she just say that?" Another posted, "This is racist. Oh my God, she actually said it." Within minutes, the stream had jumped to thousands of viewers. Pierce's jaw tightened as he realized not only was this a cabin dispute, but it was now being broadcast in real time. He looked again at Dorian, who remained silent, his eyes steady, his body still, the only movement the faint rise and fall of his chest. The passengers around them shifted uneasily, caught between discomfort and fascination, sensing history unfolding in their midst. "Sir," Pierce said carefully, "I'll need to ask for additional identification. A driver's license, credit card, anything to verify what's printed here." Dorian reached into his jacket with slow, deliberate motion, the kind that spoke of awareness, of understanding how easily his actions could be misinterpreted. Pierce tensed instinctively, but what emerged was not a weapon or a forged slip, but a wallet of fine European leather, inside of which rested a sleek black American Express Centurion card, its weight and rarity known only to those who understood its exclusivity. Pierce's breath caught for a moment, because he had only ever seen such cards in glossy magazines, never in his hands. Mary Beth, unfazed, interjected again, "Anyone can get one of those through tricks, upgrades, miles. He probably gamed the system. These seats cost $800. He doesn't look like someone who paid full price." The businessman in 1C shifted, annoyed at the delay, but visibly irritated by the undertone in her words. Dorian's reply came smooth and unshaken. "I paid full price. This morning, at 6:43 a.m. The precision of the detail cut through the cabin like a knife, unsettling Pierce more than anything else, because only someone who had actually purchased the ticket would remember such a time. Murmurs spread again, cameras held higher, passengers whispering with the intensity of an audience watching a play where each line revealed something deeper. The silence grew heavy until Pierce finally exhaled and said, "Mr. Vance, I appreciate your cooperation. Please allow us a moment to resolve this." But Mary Beth was relentless, her voice rising. "Captain, he is making everyone uncomfortable. Other passengers are complaining. This isn't right. People like him don't usually fly here." The words hung in the air, undeniable, poisonous, now recorded by dozens of devices. Dorian finally lifted his eyes and spoke for the first time since Pierce had arrived. His tone was controlled, quiet, dangerous in its precision. "People like me? Do you mean successful people? Men in suits? Or do you mean black men? The silence was suffocating. Mary Beth's lips pressed tight, but her eyes betrayed the truth of her assumption. Livestream comments exploded again, hashtags forming in real time, news stations messaging viewers for access to the footage. The cabin had become a courtroom. The jury composed of 147 passengers and thousands more watching online. Pierce wiped the sweat forming at his brow. He knew that whatever decision he made now would follow him beyond this flight, beyond his career, beyond the safety of procedure. Yet he was trained for authority, trained to act decisively, trained to trust his crew, and in that tension between protocol and perception, the weight of his choice grew unbearable. The intercom crackled, a final boarding call announced, time slipping away. Dorian checked his watch again, calm, deliberate, signaling not just patience but control, as if he were waiting for a move already predetermined. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering, recording, watching, as if they were part of a drama unfolding live on a stage they had not bought tickets to, but could not look away from. The businessman in one seat tapped his foot impatiently, while the teenage girl in 4A leaned further into the aisle with her phone, her livestream comments climbing into the tens of thousands, hashtags of discrimination and bias multiplying by the second. Pierce felt sweat gather beneath his collar, and in that moment he did what training had always taught him: attempt to assert control. "Sir," he said carefully, returning the card in the pass, "I'm going to ask you one final time to comply voluntarily. If you cannot provide additional identification beyond this, we'll have to resolve it at the gate. Please stand and accompany us outside." The words, though wrapped in formality, carried an edge that spoke of finality, and Mary Beth's eyes lit up with vindication, as though her suspicion had been justified. But Dorian did not move. He did not flinch, did not argue, did not rise to the demand. Instead, he folded his hands in his lap, leaned back slightly in his seat, and with a quiet voice that carried over the restless murmurs, he said, "No," the single word sliced through the cabin, leaving even those who had doubted him frozen in shock. Pierce's eyes narrowed, the businessman muttered "unbelievable," and Mary Beth's lips curled with triumph as she turned toward the intercom, ready to summon security. But Dorian spoke again, his voice low, calm, and cutting. "Before you do that, Captain Pierce, answer me one question. Are you familiar with Federal Aviation Regulation 91.11? The captain stiffened, the number striking a chord of memory from years of training, a regulation dealing with interference with flight crew authority. He frowned. "Sir, are you threatening legal action?" Dorian's gaze remained steady, his tone precise. "I am asking if you understand the legal framework under which you are operating, because every word, every action you take right now is being recorded by at least a dozen devices in this cabin, and within minutes will be broadcast to tens of thousands of people. That regulation cuts both ways." The livestream viewer count ticked higher, the teenage girl gasping as her phone buzzed with thousands of notifications. The businessman in 1C leaned forward, whispering to the woman across from him, "This is going to explode." Mary Beth's face reddened as she snapped, "Captain, he's threatening us. He's timing things on his watch. He's planning something." But Dorian's calm presence told another story, one that the passengers around them were beginning to see. "What I am planning," Dorian said smoothly, "is to remain seated in the seat I lawfully purchased until this aircraft lands in Phoenix. Nothing more, nothing less. Your accusations, however, are planning to end careers." The words rattled through Pierce's head, colliding with the buzzing of his radio as ground security broke through. "Captain Pierce, this is ground. We're on standby to board and remove the passenger." "Copy." Pierce opened his mouth to reply, but Dorian interrupted softly. "Captain, before you answer that, consider this. In about 30 seconds, you are going to receive a phone call that will change everything about this situation. When that phone rings, remember this moment, because it will follow you for the rest of your career." The confidence in Dorian's tone was not arrogance. It was the calm certainty of someone holding cards the others did not even know existed. The cabin felt quieter still, the tension thicker, the anticipation unbearable. Mary Beth crossed her arms, insisting, "Captain, he's disruptive. He's refusing direct orders. He's trespassing." Pierce, torn between loyalty to his crew and the unease creeping into his gut, nodded toward the aisle. "Jessica, make the call." She moved quickly toward the intercom, but before she could speak, a shrill buzz erupted from Pierce's phone. His eyes dropped to the caller ID. Southwest Operations Center, urgent. The timing was exact, chilling, undeniable. Dorian leaned back, his smile faint, knowing, unsettling. "You might want to take that, Captain," he said, his words almost a whisper, yet heard by everyone. Pierce hesitated, then answered, his voice tight. On the other end, an urgent voice said, "Captain Pierce, this is Operations. We are monitoring social media in real time. Your flight has already reached over 40,000 live viewers, and major networks are picking up the story. Handle this quietly and quickly. Do not escalate." Pierce's hand trembled slightly as he hung up, the sweat now visible at his brow, his authority cracking beneath the weight of the unseen eyes of the world pressing in through screens. Passengers looked at one another, whispering that this was no longer just a disagreement about a seat, but something larger, something that exposed the fragile edge between bias and justice. Marybeth, still clinging to her accusation, raised her voice again. "Captain, we can't let him stay. Isn't safe. He's been aggressive. He doesn't belong here." Dorian's voice sharpened now, carrying an edge that silenced the murmurs. "Aggressive? I've been seated quietly while you raised your voice, while you pointed, while you accused me. Aggressive is a word you use because of what you see when you look at me, not because of what I've done. That word is your defense, but it will become your downfall." The passengers shifted again, whispers turning to outrage, phones recording, live stream comments surging to 60,000 viewers. The businessman in 1C rubbed his temples, muttering, "This is going to ruin somebody." Pierce felt the walls of authority close in, the weight of procedure clashing with the heavier weight of perception, reputation, and the undeniable reality that the entire nation might be watching. Dorian Vance sat in seat 2A, perfectly composed, his hands folded across his lap, his watch gleaming beneath the overhead lights, his posture radiating patience and power, while Marybeth Sloan stood beside him, face flushed, her accusations sharp as knives, her conviction cracking under the weight of what she had already said. Pierce lowered the phone slowly, his throat dry, his authority eroded by the voice from above, the voice that made it clear the situation had already slipped beyond his control. Before he could speak, Marybeth hissed, "Captain, we can't let him stay here. He's refusing every order. He's timing things. He's threatening us." Dorian finally moved, tilting his head toward her, his voice smooth and controlled. "Threatening? I have not raised my voice. I have not moved from my seat. I have not broken a single rule. What I have done is sit in the seat I lawfully purchased, and that, Ms. Sloan, is apparently threat enough for you." His words echoed across the cabin, drawing gasps, whispers, mutters from the passengers who could not deny the truth in them. The teenager in 4A whispered into her phone, "This is insane. She's doubling down. She's not stopping," while her live stream count surged past 70,000. Messages flying so quickly she could no longer keep up. Pierce's mind churned, caught between Marybeth's pleas for removal and the corporate directive to defuse, yet unable to deny the growing awareness that Dorian held every card without even lifting his hand. The intercom cracked as the gate announced final boarding, minutes to departure slipping away, but no one thought of schedules now, not even the businessman in 1C who had once tapped his watch impatiently, but now leaned forward, riveted by the unfolding drama. Marybeth's voice cracked as she shouted, "Captain, look at him, really look. People like him don't fly here. He must have bought that ticket through some trick." The sentence burst out, naked in its prejudice, undeniable in its venom, captured by every camera pointed her way. The silence that followed was devastating. Dorian smiled faintly, not smugly but knowingly, as though he had waited for this moment, as though every second of patience had been building toward the inevitable collapse of her restraint. Then, as if on cue, Pierce's phone buzzed again, the vibration sharp against his palm, and the caller ID burned into his eyes. "Southwest Operations, urgent priority." He answered, his voice cracking slightly, "This is Captain Pierce." The voice on the other end was older, sharper, colder. "Captain Pierce, this is Senior Vice President Davidson. We are aware of the situation unfolding on your aircraft. You are to take no further action against the passenger in seat 2A. Corporate is monitoring this directly. Do you understand?" Pierce's knees nearly buckled, the weight of 23 years of command slipping beneath him as the hierarchy of power reversed itself mid-flight. Mary Beth gasped, whispering, "That can't be, why would they call about him?" But her words were drowned out by the furious tapping of passenger screens, tweets and posts, and live comments exploding across platforms. Dorian remained still, but his eyes gleamed with the certainty of a man who knew this would come. "You see, Captain," he said softly, "when assumptions are made, when prejudice is spoken, when bias becomes action, consequences rise faster than altitude. You should remember that." Mary Beth stammered, "This isn't possible. Board members don't fly commercial. They don't sit with passengers, they don't." She cut herself off as the realization hit, the possibility dawning in her mind that she had picked the wrong target, that the man she had accused of not belonging belonged more deeply than anyone else on that plane. Pierce tried to steady himself, clinging to protocol, to authority, to something that could restore the balance slipping from his hands. But each second revealed the futility. The operations call had stripped him of choice. The passengers' cameras had stripped him of privacy. Dorian's composure had stripped him of control. The businessman in 1C muttered loudly enough for others to hear, "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen," while the woman in 3D shook her head, whispering, "She's finished, they're all finished." The teenage girl in 4A squealed quietly as her live stream crossed 80,000, comments blurring across her screen. Newscasters sending messages asking to use her footage. The air inside the cabin grew electric, alive with anticipation of the inevitable revelation, the collapse of an entire crew's credibility under the weight of one man's patience. Dorian checked his watch again, each motion precise, calculated, unnerving. Pierce exhaled slowly, looking at Mary Beth, then at Dorian, then at the rows of watching faces. And he realized the truth he had never wanted to admit. Authority was no longer in his hands. Not here, not now, not with every camera watching, not with corporate already stepping in, not with the world judging in real time. Dorian finally unfolded his hands, his voice carrying softly across the cabin. "Captain, you've just learned a lesson many refuse to see until it's too late. Power is not about the stripes on your shoulder. Power is about truth. And truth does not need permission to speak. It speaks whether you want it to or not." Mary Beth Sloan, pale but defiant, kept shaking her head as though denial alone could rewrite what everyone had already heard, her words tumbling over themselves as she insisted this was all a mistake, that passengers like Dorian Vance didn't belong in first class. Phones hovered above seatbacks, live streams surged beyond 90,000. And whispers swelled into a chorus of disbelief and fascination. In the center of it all sat Dorian, calm as stone, his fingers resting lightly on a leather briefcase that had been by his feet from the moment he boarded. He reached down slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes locked on Pierce, and lifted it onto his lap. The cabin hushed further, anticipation knotting every stomach. Pierce's instincts screamed to halt him, to caution, to control. Yet something deeper told him to wait, to let the moment reveal itself. Dorian unlatched the briefcase and withdrew a slim leather document holder, its edges worn from use but polished by care. He opened it, slid out a card, and with a steady hand offered it to the nearest authority, Officer Janet Kim, who had arrived with security backup moments earlier and now stood ready in the aisle. She took it hesitantly, glanced at it, and her face blanched as color drained from her skin. She handed it to her partner, Officer Mike Rodriguez, who stiffened, his eyes wide, and then to Captain Pierce, whose fingers trembled as he read the words embossed in quiet authority. Dorian Vance, Chairman of the Board, Southwest Airlines. The silence after the revelation was not ordinary silence, but the kind that cracked foundations, that hollowed rooms, that made everyone aware they were witnessing something irreversible. Mary Beth staggered back, her voice breaking. "That's not real. That can't be real. Board members don't fly with passengers. They don't sit in first class, they don't." She cut herself off as her eyes darted to the phones recording her collapse, to the passengers' glares, to the businessman in 1C who muttered audibly, "She's finished," while shaking his head. Dorian reclaimed the card, slid it back into the holder, and spoke softly but with a resonance that carried to the back rows. "Why should I have to prove who I am to sit in the seat I paid for? Why should my legitimacy require more evidence than the paper in your hand? That question is not for me to answer. That question is for you, Captain, and for you, Ms. Sloan, and for everyone who has assumed my presence was a problem instead of a fact. The livestream viewer count surged past 100,000. Hashtags multiplied. Media outlets began broadcasting the footage live, and Emma Morgan, the teenager filming from 4A, gasped as her notifications flooded faster than her phone could process. Senior executives appeared suddenly on Dorian's tablet as he tapped the screen, the image of a boardroom filling the cabin with the presence of power that none of the crew had expected. Patricia Watkins, Senior Vice President of Operations, looked directly into the camera, her voice sharp and cold. "Captain Pierce, would you care to explain why our chairman is being threatened with removal on his own airline?" Behind her sat Robert Jordan, the CEO himself, his expression hard, his tone clipped as he added, "We have multiple angles of footage showing Mr. Vance seated quietly. What possible justification can you provide for this treatment?" The crew stiffened, Pierce's knees nearly buckled, and Mary Beth collapsed into a nearby seat, her body racked with sobs as the realization hit with brutal force. She had accused the wrong man, exposed herself before the world, and left a stain that could not be scrubbed away. Dorian lifted his gaze toward the passengers, his voice carrying with quiet gravity. "This is what assumptions create. This is what bias does when left unchecked. You've all seen it now. You've all recorded it. And soon the world will decide what to do with it." Phones caught every angle of his words, passengers nodding, whispering, murmuring their agreement, their recognition that the script had flipped completely. Pierce tried to speak, his voice cracking. "Sir, we had no way of knowing," but Dorian cut him off sharply. "That's the point, Captain. You assumed. Your crew assumed. And now over 100,000 people are watching those assumptions play out in real time. Would you have demanded the same of a white man in a suit, in this seat, with this ticket?" The word hung heavy, undeniable, the truth piercing deeper than any argument could. White. It was the word that no one wanted to say, the word that sat like a shadow over every accusation, every doubt, every demand for proof. And now it was spoken aloud, recorded forever, impossible to deny. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others staring at Mary Beth with disgust, while the businessman in 1C muttered, "He's right, you know." Mary Beth sobbed harder, her chest heaving, her voice reduced to broken whispers of apology that carried no weight against the evidence flooding social media. Pierce, trembling, tried again, "Sir, protocol required." But Dorian's eyes burned into them, cutting the sentence short. "Protocol says you trusted your crew's word without question. Protocol says my skin was a greater red flag than my ticket. Protocol is the mask for prejudice, and you've worn it proudly without ever asking what it hides." His words landed like hammer blows, shattering any illusion of authority Pierce still clung to. Mary Beth Sloan sat collapsed in a passenger seat, sobbing uncontrollably, her face streaked with tears, her words incoherent as she mumbled that she hadn't known, that she hadn't meant it, that she was only following procedure, but no amount of apology could erase the venom of what she had already said. The passengers, who had been whispering among themselves, now turned their eyes toward Dorian with a mix of awe and shame, their phones still raised, their recordings already flooding social media with commentary that demanded justice and accountability. Dorian sat tall in 2A, his hands folded again in his lap, his eyes steady, his voice calm, yet carrying an authority sharper than any shout as he broke the silence. "Why should I have to prove who I am to sit in the seat I paid for?" His words pierced the cabin, not just as a question, but as an indictment, the kind of question that forced reflection even on those who did not want to hear it. He turned his gaze directly toward Captain Pierce, holding it until the man could not look away, and continued, "Tell me, Captain, in your 23 years of flying, how many white men in suits have you forced to stand up in first class and prove themselves beyond their ticket?" Pierce swallowed hard, unable to answer, his throat constricted by the realization that the truth was undeniable, that he had never once asked a white man in such a position to prove anything. Dorian's voice grew firmer, slicing deeper. "And how many black men? How many passengers of color? How many times did you accept the assumptions of your crew because they fit the story you already believed?" The cabin remained hushed, the only sounds the muffled sobs of Marybeth and the soft clicks of passengers' phones recording every word, every gesture, every second that would be replayed on millions of screens before the day was done. Dorian let the silence linger, each second an eternity, before he continued, his words now directed not just to Pierce and Marybeth, but to every witness. Bias does not always scream. It does not always shout slurs or raise fists. More often it whispers. More often it hides behind words like protocol, procedure, safety. More often it wears a uniform and a smile while it decides who belongs and who does not. And when you hide behind it, when you let it dictate your actions, you strip away dignity. You strip away humanity. You strip away trust. His tone never wavered, calm but commanding, and his eyes swept the cabin, making contact with each passenger as if to pull them into the truth he was laying bare. Emma Morgan, the teenager live streaming from 4A, gasped as her viewer count ticked past 120,000, her phone vibrating furiously with comments from viewers who recognized the gravity of what they were watching. "He's right," one posted. "This is history," another wrote. "She literally said people like him don't belong. This is racism live." The businessman in 1C shifted uncomfortably, finally lowering his watch-tapping hand. His face pale as though realizing his earlier impatience had aligned him, even unintentionally, with the wrong side of history. The woman in 3D nodded silently, her phone still raised, her lips whispering the word bias, as though repeating it might anchor her in the reality of what she was witnessing. Marybeth tried once more to defend herself, her voice hoarse through sobs. "I wasn't trying to discriminate, I was only doing my job, I thought." But Dorian cut her off sharply, his tone no longer calm, but edged with steel. "You thought I did not belong. You thought my presence was suspicious. You thought my ticket was fake. And you thought those things not because of anything I did, but because of how I look. That is not your job, Miss Sloan. That is your bias." The word struck like a slap, leaving her shaking, gasping for breath, unable to meet his eyes, while the passengers' phones captured her collapse for the world to see. Captain Pierce finally tried to interject, his voice weak. "Sir, perhaps we can move forward, perhaps we can resolve." But Dorian's eyes snapped to him, his voice now sharp and unforgiving. "Resolve? You cannot resolve what you refuse to name. Call it what it is, Captain. Call it what it has always been. Racism." The word fell like a hammer in the cabin, undeniable, unescapable, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Pierce's face blanched, his lips trembling as though the word itself had stripped away the last defense he had clung to. The passengers murmured, some nodding, others whispering agreement, the live stream comments exploding with messages that cheered the moment as a reckoning. Dorian leaned back slightly, his voice lowering but losing none of its force. "The truth is simple. If I were white, this conversation would not exist. If I were white, I would have been offered a drink, not an interrogation. If I were white, I would be a passenger. But because I am black, I became a suspect the moment I sat down. And now the world has seen it. The world has recorded it. And the world will not forget it." His words rang out as a final verdict, a declaration that pierced deeper than any corporate order or security threat could. Emma's phone buzzed again, her live stream surpassing 150,000 viewers, the comments surging faster than she could read. Major networks now broadcasting clips of Dorian's words live, anchors already framing the story as a landmark moment in the fight against systemic bias. Marybeth crumbled completely, curling forward with her head in her hands, sobbing so loudly it echoed through the cabin, while Pierce stood trembling, stripped bare of the authority he once wielded so confidently. Now nothing more than another man forced to face the truth of his complicity. The passengers watched, silent but reverent, as Dorian checked his watch once more, a gesture that by now had become a symbol, a reminder that every second mattered, that every word spoken in this cabin was now immortalized in digital stone. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm once again, his control absolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly but firmly, "you have just witnessed what bias looks like when it is stripped of excuses." Every eye followed him, every camera zoomed closer, and even Pierce, who wanted desperately to halt the display, dared not interrupt. Dorian withdrew a stack of documents bound neatly in a folder embossed with the airline's insignia, each page marked and tabbed as if prepared for a courtroom. He held them in his lap for a moment before speaking, his voice calm but resonant. "You think this began when I sat down in seat 2A? You think this began with Ms. Sloane's words or with Captain Pierce's orders? But the truth is this began long before today. I did not arrive unprepared. I came here knowing what might happen, hoping perhaps it would not, but prepared for the inevitability that it would." The passengers shifted uneasily, the businessman in 1C leaning forward with narrowed eyes, the woman in 3D gasping quietly, and Emma Morgan's live stream viewer count ticking past 160,000 as comments flooded the feed with disbelief that the confrontation was not accident but design. Dorian opened the folder, revealing charts, graphs, and reports stamped with confidential headers. He lifted the top page for all to see, and though most could not read the fine print, the bold title at the top was unmistakable: Discrimination Complaint Analysis, Q1 2024. His voice carried evenly, never rushed, each word sharpened by intent. In the past quarter alone, Southwest Airlines has received 47 discrimination complaints from passengers of color alleging mistreatment, wrongful removal, and biased assumptions made by crew. 47 in 3 months. And yet, how many have been addressed? How many investigated thoroughly? How many resolved with accountability? He let the silence answer for him, and the silence was damning. Pierce shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the folder with recognition, realizing that these were internal documents he had never expected to see outside headquarters. Mary Beth lifted her tear-streaked face, whispering hoarsely, "This can't be real." But her protest was drowned beneath the flood of passenger murmurs, some shocked, some outraged, all enthralled. Dorian laid another sheet on top, this one bearing a header that read Internal Audit. Bias Incidents, Premium Cabins. This is not isolated. This is systemic. In the last 2 years, premium cabin removals have disproportionately affected passengers of color at rates 10 times higher than white passengers. 10 times. That is not chance. That is not coincidence. That is bias woven into the very fabric of this airline's operations. His words landed heavy, his evidence undeniable, and the passengers exchanged wide-eyed looks of horror while phones captured the papers as proof. Emma's live-stream comments exploded. This was a setup. He planned this test. Genius. They fell right into it. The businessman in 1C muttered under his breath, "It's a trap," and they walked right into it, while the woman in 3D whispered, "No, it's not a trap, it's a lesson." Captain Pierce finally found his voice, his words thin and desperate. "Sir, are you telling me this was orchestrated? That you boarded this plane intending to provoke?" Dorian cut him off, his voice sharp. "I boarded this plane intending to fly. It was your crew that supplied the provocation. It was Ms. Sloane who provided the prejudice. It was you who attempted to enforce it. I simply gave you the rope, and you hung yourselves with it." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Mary Beth buried her face in her hands again, and Pierce felt his chest tighten with the weight of the truth he could not deny. Dorian lifted yet another document, this one stamped draft press release. The bold headline read, "Southwest Airlines announces comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative following chairman's personal experience with bias." He held it aloft so the passengers could see the unmistakable language, the opening lines of a corporate announcement already prepared, already waiting to be released. His voice was measured but heavy with meaning. This press release will be issued within the hour. It will announce mandatory bias training for every employee, third-party audits of customer service, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and a $10 million fund dedicated to addressing these failures. And you, ladies and gentlemen, you are all witnesses to why it is necessary. The passengers erupted into hushed murmurs, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding vigorously, and the businessman in 1C finally dropped his watch to his lap, staring blankly as though realizing his impatience had been complicit in something far greater than a flight delay. Pierce whispered almost to himself, "You planned this. You planned all of it." But Dorian's gaze pierced him as he replied, "I planned to sit in my seat. You planned the discrimination. You executed it flawlessly. I simply let the world watch. The live stream counter ticked higher again, past 180,000, Emma whispering to her phone. This is history. We're in the middle of history. Dorian returned the documents to his folder, closed it carefully, and rested his hands atop it, his composure unbroken, his control absolute. You wanted to know if I belonged. Now you know. I belong not just in this seat, but in every boardroom, in every conversation where justice is demanded. And because of what has happened here today, this airline will change. This industry will change. And it will not be because of your compliance, but because of your failure. The businessman in 1C, who had once been impatient for departure, now sat rigid, his face pale as though he were realizing he had witnessed something that would stain the airline forever. The woman in 3D whispered frantically to her husband that this would be on the news for weeks, and Emma Morgan's live stream counter spun wildly, surging toward 200,000 viewers, the comments a blur of outrage, vindication, and calls for accountability. Dorian leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying with quiet certainty. Now let us discuss the cost. He reached for his tablet, tapped the screen, and a live stock ticker appeared, projected so clearly that those nearest gasped at the sight of numbers tumbling downward in real time. When we took off, he said steadily, Southwest Airlines stock price was $34.67 per share. At this moment, it is $32.15. That is a decline of over 7% in less than an hour, a loss of $847 million in shareholder value. $847 million evaporated because of bias and assumption acted out in this cabin. The words landed with brutal clarity, and Pierce staggered back a step, his knees weakening under the weight of numbers that exceeded comprehension. Mary Beth let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth with her hands, realizing that her voice, her insistence, her choice of words had just been linked directly to nearly $1 billion lost. The passengers gasped, whispered, filmed even more furiously. Their shock mingled with disbelief that one flight attendant's prejudice and one captain's complicity could have triggered such monumental financial fallout. Dorian's voice did not rise, but his words grew sharper, cutting through the cabin's thick air. You see, this is not about one seat. This is not about one passenger. This is about systemic negligence, repeated patterns, and unchecked bias that investors, regulators, and the public will no longer tolerate. You thought this was about control of a cabin. I assure you, it is about control of an industry. He tapped the tablet again, and another screen appeared, an internal audit log, rows of numbers and names. Captain Pierce, Dorian said evenly, in the past 2 years, you have authorized the removal of 17 passengers from premium cabins. 15 of them were people of color. 2 were white. Do you call that coincidence? Do you call that procedure? Or do you call that what it is? Pierce's lips parted, but no sound emerged. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his face gray, his mind scrambling for an explanation that would not come. Dorian leaned back, his eyes never leaving him. You never realized because you never questioned. You followed procedure when it aligned with your assumptions. You trusted crew when they fed your bias. You acted without asking, without checking, without remembering that every passenger carries the same right once their ticket is scanned. And today you stand exposed not just before me, not just before this cabin, but before hundreds of thousands of people watching live. The passengers murmured louder now, their eyes flicking between Pierce and Dorian, some shaking their heads, others muttering words of condemnation. Mary Beth's sobbing intensified, her body trembling, her breath shallow, the sound of her collapse echoing with humiliating finality. MS. Sloan, Dorian continued, his tone softer but no less damning. You said people like me don't belong here. Do you understand now what those words mean? Do you understand that with those words, you did not just insult me? You insulted every black passenger, every passenger of color, every customer who has ever trusted this airline with their dignity? Do you understand that your assumption has cost nearly $1 billion in value and opened the door to lawsuits that will cost hundreds of millions more? She tried to speak, choking on tears, but her words dissolved into broken fragments. Phones captured every second of her collapse, live stream comments filling with lines like, "She ruined her life in 30 minutes, and he's destroying them with facts." Dorian turned back to Pierce, his tone still calm but edged with finality. "You asked what this means for you, Captain. Let me tell you, it means your career stands on the edge of ruin. It means every decision you've made, every passenger you've removed, will be scrutinized in light of the bias you never questioned. It means your silence when prejudice spoke will be remembered as complicity. And it means that today, this flight, this confrontation, will define you more than 23 years of service ever did." Pierce's face twisted in anguish, his eyes falling toward the floor as though ashamed to meet the gaze of those who now saw him not as a veteran captain, but as a man unmasked by his own record. The businessman in 1C muttered again, "This is catastrophic," while the woman in 3D whispered, "This is justice." Emma's phone buzzed violently in her hand, her live stream count climbing past 210,000. Her feed filled with comments cheering Dorian's composure and demanding accountability from the airline. Dorian checked his watch again, a gesture that had by now become a symbol, each glance marking not just time, but the measured dismantling of an entire system of prejudice. He exhaled slowly and said, "We have reached the point where consequences are no longer hypothetical. They are real. They are here. The evidence is clear, the cost has already been measured, and the world is watching it unfold in real time. The question now is what you will do next." His words stirred the passengers, some shifting in their seats, some nodding faintly, all recognizing that this was no longer about a single injustice, but about the possibility of transformation, the possibility of redemption. Dorian set his briefcase aside, rested his hands on his knees, and continued, his voice unflinching. "I am giving you a choice. You can fight this, deny it, cling to excuses and procedure, and in doing so destroy not only your careers, but every last shred of credibility you once held. Or you can admit the truth, own your failures, and take the harder road, the road of confession, of accountability, of becoming advocates instead of obstacles." Mary Beth lifted her head weakly, her voice trembling through the wreckage of sobs. "You want us to confess publicly, to humiliate ourselves, to admit everything on camera?" Dorian met her gaze with steady intensity. "Humiliation? Ms. Sloan, humiliation is being forced to prove yourself again and again because of the color of your skin. Humiliation is being treated as a suspect while sitting quietly in a seat you paid for. Humiliation is being branded aggressive for remaining calm while others raise their voices against you. What I am offering you is not humiliation. It is a path to redemption. It is a chance to turn your failure into a lesson, a chance to stand as examples of how bias can be unlearned, how dignity can be restored, how people who made mistakes can still contribute to change." She swallowed hard, her sobs subsiding into shallow breaths, her eyes flickering with the faintest spark of recognition, of hope that even amidst ruin, something could be salvaged. Dorian turned his gaze on Pierce, whose face was gray, his jaw tight, his eyes haunted. "Captain Pierce, you have carried authority for 23 years, and yet in this cabin today, you let assumption dictate your actions. You let prejudice wear the mask of protocol. You let your crew's bias go unquestioned. That is the truth. But now you must decide whether you will remain defined by that failure or whether you will use it as a weapon against the very prejudice that ensnared you." Pierce's lips parted, his voice breaking as he whispered, "What would you have me do?" Dorian leaned back slightly, folding his hands again, his composure unbroken. "You will confess, live on camera. You will admit what you did, admit the assumptions you made, admit the bias you ignored. And then you will commit to traveling across this country to every Southwest hub, to stand before new employees and veterans alike, and tell them this story, not from my perspective, but from yours. You will tell them how quickly assumptions can become actions, how actions can become consequences, how consequences can destroy lives and companies. And you will commit to doing it not once, not twice, but for as long as it takes until the culture of this industry changes." Gasps rippled through the cabin, whispers swirling, phones capturing every word. Emma Morgan's live stream counter spun wildly, surging past 230,000, comments screaming in all caps that this was historic, that they were watching the blueprint for justice unfold live in the air. Pierce's hands shook, his lips trembling as he whispered. That would mean reliving this over and over. That would mean his voice trailed off, but Dorian finished the sentence for him. That would mean owning it, Captain. That would mean showing your son, your family, your colleagues, that you are not defined by your bias, but by your choice to confront it. That would mean proving that redemption is possible, but only through truth. At the mention of his son, Pierce's composure cracked completely, his eyes filling with tears he had long held back. My boy, he whispered, his voice catching. He's mixed race. I never thought about it before, not like this. What if someone treated him the way I treated you? What if he grows up facing the same assumptions I made today? God help me, I couldn't live with that. His words struck the passengers like lightning, the confession breaking through the air. A veteran captain reduced to a father confronting the legacy he might leave. Dorian's gaze softened slightly, though his voice remained steady. Then let this be your moment, Captain Pierce. Let this be the day you decide to change not only for yourself, but for him. Let him see his father stand, admit, and fight to do better. Pierce nodded slowly, tears streaming freely down his face now, his voice a broken whisper. I'll do it. I'll admit it. I'll commit to it. Dorian turned back to Marybeth, who trembled in her seat, her hands twisting in her lap. And UMS Sloan. She looked up, her face still streaked with tears, her voice raw but steadying. I have a daughter, she said softly. She's 7. I don't want her to learn prejudice from me. I don't want her to think people are less because of how they look. I want her to know people can change, that mistakes don't have to define them forever. If it means confessing, if it means standing in front of cameras, if it means facing anger and shame again and again, then yes, I'll do it. I'll confess. I'll commit. I'll do it for her. The cabin exhaled collectively, passengers murmuring, nodding, recording, their faces softened by the sight of 2 broken figures choosing not denial, but the possibility of redemption. Dorian checked his watch again, nodding once, and then spoke firmly, his voice filling the cabin with gravity. So be it. You will confess. You will commit. And you will face the consequences not as denials, but as lessons, not as cowards, but as advocates. The world will still judge you, but perhaps your children will not. Perhaps they will see in you the courage to admit wrong and the resolve to make it right. The live stream counter ticked higher still, surging to 250,000, comments filling with words like justice, redemption, and history. The decision was made, the path was chosen, and yet the cabin of Flight 2847 remained heavy with the knowledge that the reckoning was far from complete, because confessions and commitments, though powerful, were only the beginning of the long road toward justice. Dorian Vance sat motionless in Seat 2A, his hands folded neatly, his watch glinting beneath the fluorescent cabin lights, as if marking the seconds until landing, while Captain Harlan Pierce and Marybeth Sloan sat hollowed out, their shoulders slumped, their faces wet with tears, their futures dangling between shame and the slim chance of redemption. The passengers, who had become an impromptu jury throughout the ordeal, now shifted uneasily in their seats, some murmuring in low voices, others staring silently at the man who had orchestrated the exposure of prejudice with a calmness that felt larger than the cabin itself. Emma Morgan's live stream counter had now surpassed 300,000 viewers. A tidal wave of witnesses spread across the globe, each comment flooding in faster than she could read, words of outrage and praise and disbelief colliding in real time. Dorian finally exhaled and stood, his height commanding the attention of every eye, his voice steady as he spoke not just to those in the cabin, but to the cameras that had turned this flight into a global courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed something extraordinary today. You have seen how quickly assumptions become accusations, how accusations become consequences, and how those consequences ripple far beyond a single cabin. You have seen how bias, left unchecked, can destroy not only dignity, but also trust, value, and reputation. But you have also seen how truth, once exposed, can create the possibility of change. His words resonated with passengers who nodded solemnly, their phones still recording, their hearts still racing from the intensity of what they had experienced. Pierce rose slowly, his uniform wrinkled, his voice unsteady but clear. "Mr. Vance, I cannot undo what has been done. I cannot erase the words I spoke, the actions I took, the assumptions I never questioned. But I will own them. I will admit them. And I will spend whatever years I have left trying to undo the harm I have caused, not by denial, but by teaching others not to repeat my mistakes." His words drew murmurs from the passengers, some of approval, others of skepticism, but all recognizing that he had finally broken through the wall of denial that had once shielded him. Mary Beth lifted her head, her voice soft, her hands trembling. "I will do the same. I will confess. I will tell my story. I will show my daughter that her mother did not run from her mistakes, but faced them. I will not let this be the end of me. I will let it be the beginning of who I should have been all along." Her words, though shaky, carried sincerity, and some passengers even applauded quietly, recognizing the fragility of a woman shattered, yet choosing to rebuild on the foundation of truth. Dorian nodded once, his expression calm, then addressed the cabin again. "Redemption is not guaranteed. It is not promised. It is not earned through words alone. It is earned through action, through repetition, through the daily choice to confront bias not in others, but in ourselves." Captain Pierce and MS Sloan have chosen the harder road, and for that they deserve the chance to prove they can walk it. But make no mistake, the world will be watching, and so will I. The plane began its descent toward Phoenix, the engines humming steadily, the runway lights twinkling in the distance, but no one thought of arrival in the ordinary sense anymore. They thought of what awaited at the gate. Cameras, reporters, investigators, executives, protesters, lawyers, and the storm of accountability that would greet them. Yet for Dorian, the real work was already underway, because the true transformation had begun not with corporate press releases or policy changes, but with the shattering of silence, the naming of bias, the exposure of truth in front of witnesses who could never again claim ignorance. The wheels touched down with a jolt that rattled the cabin, and as the brakes screeched against the runway, the passengers held their breath, knowing that history was waiting just beyond the jet bridge. The doors opened and the flood of cameras and reporters surged forward, their flashes illuminating the faces of Pierce and Mary Beth as they stepped forward beside Dorian, their shame visible, their commitment trembling but real. Federal investigators moved in, corporate executives waited grim-faced. But amidst the chaos, Dorian raised his voice one last time before stepping into the storm. Today was not about me. Today was about the truth. And the truth is this: prejudice survives in silence. Bias thrives in shadows. Injustice grows when no one speaks. But when it is named, when it is exposed, when it is confronted openly, it loses its power. That is the lesson of Flight 2847. And that is the lesson we will carry forward. His words were echoed in headlines within minutes, plastered across news outlets around the globe, replayed endlessly on social media, dissected by commentators and activists and ordinary people who recognized that they had witnessed a turning point in the struggle against systemic discrimination. 3 months later, the Vance Protocol, shaped directly from this confrontation, became mandatory training across the airline industry. Its case study required for every employee. Its lessons repeated in classrooms, boardrooms, and training halls. Discrimination complaints dropped by 80%. Passengers of color began to report greater trust in flying. And for the first time in decades, the industry acknowledged openly that it had harbored bias and committed itself to real change. Captain Pierce traveled from hub to hub, confessing his story, facing hostile questions, enduring shame, but each time reminding himself of his son and the promise he had made to be better. Mary Beth stood before thousands of employees, her voice trembling, but her resolve strong, telling them of the day her words cost nearly $1 billion and how she chose to turn her failure into a lesson for others. And Dorian Vance, though lauded as the man who changed an industry, always reminded reporters, executives, and activists that the true heroes were not him, but the witnesses, the passengers who recorded, the viewers who shared, the public who demanded accountability. Change, he would say, is never about one man. It is about all of us deciding that enough is enough. On a quiet evening 6 months later, he sat in his office reviewing emails when one caught his eye, written by a white woman from Ohio named Sarah Thompson, who had witnessed bias on a different flight. She described how she had remembered his story, raised her phone, recorded the truth, spoken up, and prevented a Latino family from being removed unjustly. Her closing words read, "You gave me courage. Because of you, I acted. Thank you." Dorian leaned back in his chair, a small smile breaking through his usually stoic expression, because in that moment he understood the real victory. It was not in the billions saved, not in the lawsuits prevented, not even in the reforms achieved. It was in ordinary people finding the courage to speak, to act, to confront injustice when it appeared before them the end. If this story gripped you, if you felt the weight of each moment in the cabin of Flight 2847, then I'd like to hear your thoughts. What part of the plot struck you the most? And what message do you take from it? Let me know in the comments, and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Your perspective matters, and your voice adds to the conversation. If you believe stories like this need to be told, if you think truth and accountability deserve a wider audience, then subscribe to the channel and share this video so others can experience it. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps ensure more people see these stories and reflect on their meaning.